Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon if you're in Asia. My name is Niklas Svanström, and I'm heading the Institute for Security and Development Policy here in Stockholm. Today, we're going to talk about reframing Korea and the EU strategic cooperation, strengthening the liberal order to enhance Korea-Nordic cooperation. And with us today, we have Geno, and he's the co-founder and president of the international division of the Young Leaders Forum. And when he was a guest researcher here at the ISDP, he did some research on global governance at the crossroads, Korea-EU strategic partnership, and he made one of the really interesting publications. And we wanted to take that back and talk a bit about this publication, how he views the not EU Korea, but also, of course, the Nordic Korea relations, what we can do to improve the relations, and what kind of role Europe and the Nordics could actually play for Korea. And looking at the international environment today, new partnership becomes increasingly important. We see threats to the international liberal order. We see challenges in our bilateral relations with former and current allies, but also closer cooperation with non-democratic states. So, of course, from a European perspective, I see South Korea as an enormously important partner in the future. But that's my views, and we're here to listen to Geno. So, Geno, do you want to take over and give us your insights on this topic?
Sure. Thank you. I just want to share my screen first. I think everyone can see this. So, thank you very much for your warm introduction, Nicholas. I'm very delighted to present my research report today. And first of all, let me begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to ISDP for giving me this valuable opportunity to share my research today. So my name is Jinu Lee. I'm currently serve as the president of the International Division at the Korean Leaders Forum. If I may, briefly introduce the Korean Leaders Forum. So our forum is a bipartisan next generation think tank dedicated to issues on the Korean Peninsula. And from the perspective of young professionals, we serve as both a policy-oriented platform and forum for exchange and offering practical recommendations on North Korean foreign policy in general. And also from May to June this year, I had the privilege of working as a guest researcher at ICP's Korea Center in Stockholm. So during my time there, I conducted research on the theme of this presentation, strengthening the liberal international order through enhanced Korea-Nordic cooperation. So in this presentation, I'd like to introduce a new perspective from young professionals from South Korea on how Korean Nordic countries can explore innovative avenues of cooperation. In particular, I'd like to focus on how such cooperation can contribute to the rules-based international order and the liberal international order and the global promotion of democracies and governance. So as we all know, the global order is currently at a critical crossroads. The first one is, of course, obviously, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has now entered its third year. And also, we're witnessing fractures in the transatlantic alliances and overall alliances in the world. And also, the US is moving toward a more selective engagement, leaving behind a leadership vacuum in global governance. And most recently, the display of authoritarian solidarity among North Korea, China, Russia during Chinese Victory Day celebration has further highlighted these challenges. So against this backdrop, my my research will explore how South Korea and the EU, and especially South Korean Nordic countries, can build multilateral partnerships that not only safeguard the rules-based international order and values, but also help fill the leadership vacuum in multilateralism. So today's presentation will follow this simple structure, begin with some introduction and the current status of the global governance, and the current the status and limitation of Korea-EU's strategic cooperation and structural challenges that could hinder the Korea-EU's partnership, and also my three main policy recommendation and conclusion, and then we'd like to engage in discussions in the Q&A session. The first one, I think the global governance landscape today stands at very critical turning point. We are witnessing the erosion of the rules-based order, whether through the weakening of the multilateral trading system and the fragmentation of alliances as the ongoing war in Ukraine and U.S. growing tendency toward the selective engagement. So I think together these developments point to a deep crisis and of both legitimacy and function in global governance. So in the absence of clear leadership to uphold and to renew the liberal order, there is now urgent need for new strategic partnerships that can protect and advance its core principles. So in this context, I think cooperation between South Korea and European Union, especially with the Nordic engagement, offers a timely and promising model at this time. For instance, like South Korea having grown under the liberal order since the Korean War and has achieved remarkable democratic economic resilience and social progress. And today, as a member of world's advanced economies, I think also increasingly aligned with G7 plus diplomacy. South Korea is a well-positioned to contribute to the renewal of liberal norms and institutions. And the EU has long been a global promoter of liberal international values, supporting democracy, rule of law, and multilateral governance. So, especially within the European Union, the Nordic countries stand out as exemplary liberal democracies and champions of values-based diplomacy, and they have led in peace building and conflict mediation and global human rights advocacy through the OSCE and the Council of Europe back in the days. So, although South Korea's democratic history is relatively recent, its experience with rapid democratization and institutional resilience gives a strong credibility as a partner in defending liberal values. So ultimately, a deeper South Korea-EU strategic partnership reinforced by Nordic cooperation, I believe they can provide both symbolic and substantive momentum to revitalize the liberal international order and strengthen the resilience of global governance. So let me begin just briefly mention about the current status of the global governance. I'd like to emphasize the U.S. Growing tendency toward the selective engagement. So we're seeing the resurgence of national conservatism, especially epitomized by Trump's return, which has reshaped the mainstream Republican Party's conservative ideology. So traditional tenets like free markets and globalization are being sidelined in favor of more nationalism and skepticism toward multiculturalism and distrust of international institutions and liberal economics. Reflecting this shift, key U.S. institutions that once championed the democracy and human rights and rules-based order, such as the National Endowment for Democracy, NED, and the State Department's Bureau of Democracy and Human Rights and Labor, DRL, and USAID, and U.S. Institute of Peace, and broadcasting agencies like VOA and RFA, RFE, are facing severe restructuring and budget cuts. For instance, the NED, which allocated $286 million last year, but now its funding suspended for the first time in 40 years. Although the funding was partially restored, its operations remain in jeopardy, reducing staff and scope. I think also the State Department DRL is facing the same circumstances, and they're having a leaner portfolios. I think these changes have direct consequences for civil society in Asia, including North Korean human rights NGOs and democracy organizations in fragile contexts like in Myanmar. So the impact extends to Ukraine as well. I think while cutting DRL programs and foreign assistance would undermine the further U.S. support for democratic resilience. So, and also meanwhile, the U.S. retreat from the multilateral continues. The Trump administration has announced withdrawals from the UN Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and WHO. And also, I think so overall, the net result is pretty clear. A profound erosion of the post-World War II liberal order, one that was historically led by the US, but it's now in retreat. But however, I believe that the liberal order is not collapsing altogether because G7 countries, including the European Union, Japan, and Canada, continue to lead in defending these norms and addressing global challenges. And also, G7 plus partners like South Korea and Australia are also stepping up and contributing through diplomacy and institutional support. So in this respect, I think enhanced EU-South Korea cooperation, especially with the Nordics, offers a strong example of how leading democracies can take greater responsibility in safeguarding and renewing this liberal order. Um, Especially South Korea has greatly benefited from the post-war liberal system and now seeks to act as a global pivotal state and must align more actively with like-minded partners. And the EU, of course, with their long tradition of multilateralism and democratic governance, I think closer Korea-EU Nordic cooperation could provide both symbolic and substantive momentum to revitalize this um, order. And then I just want to briefly mention the South Korea EU strategic cooperation, the current status. Since their elevation to a strategic partnership in 2010, South Korean EU relations have steadily expanded in areas like security, supply chain resilience, and also key milestone came in last year with the first strategic dialogue and security defense partnership and a renewed joint commitment to upholding the rules-based order. At the especially last this year's during the Shangri-La dialogue in Singapore, EU High Representative stressed that Europe and Asia's security are deeply interconnected, signaling the EU's intent to deepen the cooperation with partners like South Korea. Yet, despite this progress, the partnership remains under-institutionalized. For instance, the Security and Defense Partnership is still a non-binding political document. And also, meanwhile, a deepening military cooperation between North Korea and Russia underscores the urgency of stronger alignment. And evidence shows that the North Korea circumventing UN sanctions through arm transfers and financial operations and sensitive technologies, I think posing threats that link European and Asian security directly. So in this context, I think especially South Korea and EU, especially with Nordic partners, must build a more structured and institutionalized framework. Solidarity is particularly vital when it comes to issues like Ukraine's reconstruction and human rights concerns linked to North Korean troop deployments. So ultimately, while North Korea and the EU are well positioned to act as normative leaders, the current mechanisms are not enough. So sustained and institutionalized cooperation is essential to navigate today's, I think, the complex challenges. Um, and for the next one, despite the efforts to strengthen ties, a fully institutionalized Korea-EU partnership still face internal hurdles. The first one I'd like to mention from the Korea's perspective, on the Korean side. In South Korea, the foreign and security policy is highly politicized and polarized. So each administration tends to reverse its predecessors' policies, which undermines strategic continuity and long-term diplomatic credibility at the same time. And foreign policy is often weaponized in domestic debates. And also, I think especially like to stress that this lack of bipartisan consensus prevents the development of a stable grand strategy and weakens the sustainability of Korea's foreign policy. As a brief example, North Korean human rights policy has swung sharply by administration. During the Moon administration, it deprioritized the issue, while Yoon quickly prioritized the issues and back and forth. So this kind of the continuity, I think that's the most important problem internally from South Korean side. But the EU side, of course, the EU also faces institutional and political constraints because as a union of 27 states, it must balance diverse national interests, and the unanimity rule in key areas often gives individual veto powers. For instance, like Hungary's repeated blocking of Russia-related sanctions before, and this illustrate, I think, those kind of difficulties. And also EU's multi-layered governance structure involving the Council, Parliament, Commission, I think could slow down the decision-making process and delay crisis responses. I believe it's most importantly, the threat perceptions also differ. Northern and Baltic states prioritize Russia as a main threat, but on the other side, the Southern European countries focuses more on irregular migration. So given these constraints, a fully institutionalized Korea-EU framework will take time. It will be more incremental. So a pragmatic way forward is to pursue flexible and issue-based unilateral mechanisms with like-minded partners. So in this respect, enhanced South Korea-Nordic cooperation could act as a catalyst, helping to broaden EU engagement and Korea's engagement, defense, norm promotion, and governance reform at the same time. So I have main three policy recommendations. The first one is to establish the South Korea Nordic Baltic Multilateral Democracy Forum. And the second one is the Korea-Nordic Partnership on Official Security Assistance. And the third one is collaboration on enhancing information accessibilities for Russian and North Korean people. So the first recommendation as a first step, I like to propose the creation of South Korea Nordic Baltic Multilateral Democracy Forum. South Korea, despite its relatively recent democratization, has demonstrated remarkable democratic resilience, especially we overcame the recent martial law crisis as well. And also, the Nordic countries are widely regarded as models of liberal democracy. So together, they can form a compelling partnership to support the rules-based international order. Unlike existing platforms such as the Korea Nordic Innovation Day, which focus mainly on economics and technology and more industry based cooperation, this forum would address governance, democracy, and the rule of law and rules-based international order. So it should take a form of a track 1.5 mechanism, bringing together all the government officials, experts, and emerging leaders with the permanent foundation serving as its secretary to institutionalize research, dialogue, and policy implementation. I believe the forum should tackle urgent challenges such as Ukraine's reconstruction issue and North Korea-Russia's military collaboration and authoritarian alignment reflected during the recent Chinese Victories Day parade. And also, I think Baltic countries must be included given their frontline perspective on threats to the rules-based order. So I think the threat perception between Korea, Nordic, and Baltics are actually are at the same page at this point. So I think that's very important to joint discussions on regional security and hybrid threats and democratic resilience will strengthen a shared strategic agenda at the same time. Crucially, I think the platform must engage with the next generation leaders, fostering young professionals in democracy, rule of law, maybe climate change or gender equality as well, so they can carry forward these liberal democratic values and rules and norms. So, as Swedish foreign minister noted, I think the maintaining the rules-based order and international law is vital for both security and stability. So, in this sense, the establishment of this forum would be a concrete step toward defending shared values, reinforcing democratic governance, and filling leadership gaps in a time of growing geopolitical threats. Building on this forum, its more ideal recommendation is that the South Korea and the EU could develop a comprehensive international democracy fund. So the fund would pursue three main key objectives. The first one is to support the long-term preservation of the rules-based order. And the second one is that I think it's most importantly to reduce the strategic and financial dependency of democracy and human rights organizations by reducing their financial and strategic dependency. And the third one is to provide a next generation and to empower the next generation through fellowships, exchanges, and professional development programs, equipping young people to uphold liberal international order and democratic norms in the long term. Additionally, I think the fund should support innovative strategies as well, and the administrated through a multinational secretary is also needed that could run programs reinforcing democratic values regionally and globally, and fostering mutual understanding and capacity building and interdependence among the participants. So I think by creating this kind of the predictable and autonomous funding systems and supporting systems, the fund would address structure and vulnerabilities and faced by democracy organizations and ensure long-term sustainability of the democratic ecosystem overall in the world. So I think in conclusion, this initiative would not only safeguard liberal democratic values amid rising authoritarianism, but also empower a new generation of leaders, anchoring long-term resilience in the democratic global order. The second one is the partnership on official security assistance. I believe South Korea and EU, especially the Nordic countries, should consider benchmarking Japan's official security assistance OSA model to enhance cooperation at the intersection of security and development. So, unlike traditional development aid, um, the OSA provides more proactive and security-focused support, including defense equipment and non-lethal weapons and logistical supplies and infrastructure overall to strengthen the partner countries' deterrence and resilience. Japan has expanded OSAs to Southeast Asia, Africa, and the Pacific, and demonstrating how security-focused development assistance can build mid to long-term partnership and empower local security capacities. So in this context, I think South Korea and Nordic countries could adopt a similar approach in the Indo-Pacific and Baltic regions. So I believe joint initiative might include the first, the maritime domain awareness and radar system deployment. And second one is application of advanced technologies, including AI and robotics. And the third one is training and equipment support for civilian security sector reform, especially those in Ukraine's reconstruction domain. Especially recent Korean Nordic defense collaborations, such as joint R&D and AI, robotics and space technologies, I believe it's highlighting growing potential for the cooperation. And such a framework would strengthen regional resilience and promote democratic governance and reinforce the rules-based order and positioning South Korea, Nordics, and European Union as trusted security partners in strategically vital regions. The last but not least, I'd like to emphasize the last one, is the South Korea and the EU should explore innovative ways to expand access to uncensored information for population in Russia and North Korea. So a promising avenue would be South Korea's potential collaboration on the EU's 10.6 billion IRIS-2 satellite constellation, a secure space-based communication internet network comparable to Starlink by Elon Musk. I think this would enable satellite internet access capable of bypassing, for instance, like North Korea's information firewall and also circumventing digital restrictions in Russia. Expanding digital freedom is critical to weakening authoritarian information control and fostering civil society. For instance, the recent examples, Starlink's role during Iran's 2022 internet blackout and Ukraine's conflict, show the potential of resilient satellite networks to maintain communication and promote freedom of expression even in authoritarian and conflict settings. So beyond this immediate impact, I think satellite-based communication initiatives align with broader goals of upholding the rules-based order and defending digital rights. So South Korean EU collaboration on possibly IRIS-2 would represent a forward-looking and values-driven effort to strengthen the global democratic infrastructure. But however, I think the practical challenges to realizing these initiatives ultimately depends on South Korean government's political will and foreign policy direction. So unlike the previous Yoon government's values-based diplomacy, the current new Lee administration has adopted a more pragmatic approach, prioritizing the prevention of further deterioration in Seoul-Moscow relations and restoration of inter-Korean dialogue. in this context, I think expanding information access for Russian and North Korean citizens, as well as pursuing a more proactive approach to Nordic and Baltic countries when it comes to security and democracy, I think may not fully align with the new administration's pragmatic foreign policy vision at this point. But however, the Lee administration has also identified the G7 plus diplomacy and international contribution and diversification of partnerships as key policy objectives from the National Policy Planning Committee's proposals. So I think from this perspective, such initiatives offer a meaningful opportunity to project a more proactive and capable foreign policy. So, in my view, from my perspective, safeguarding universal values is not contrary to pragmatic diplomacy. It is, in fact, the essence of pragmatic diplomacy and the basis for South Korea to be recognized as credible G7 plus partner. So, the rules-based order, the sovereign equality, and the universal human rights directly affect the everyday lives of our citizens. So defending these principles, freedom of navigation, the basic human rights, and the rules-based multilateralism is what enables South Korea to practice leadership, diplomacy, and contribution and globally engaged statecraft. So especially in an era where authoritarian regimes like North Korea, China, Russia are deepening their alignment, I think a value-based solidarity with like-minded partners such as the EU and particularly the Nordic and Baltic states will strengthen South Korea's strategic position in the international community. So, in conclusion, with the liberal international order under strain and a widening leadership vacuum in global governance, it is imperative for South Korea and the EU to step up as principal defenders of a rules-based system. The rise of authoritarianism and growing geopolitical instability make this task even more urgent from my perspective. So in this context, deeper South Korea EU cooperation, especially through Nordic's stronger engagement with Nordic countries, can play a pivotal role. The Nordics bring the credibility of long-established liberal democracies, while South Korea contributes to the perspective of a dynamic and resilient democracy shaped by rapid transformation and civic participation. So these complementary strengths create a strong foundation for shared leadership in promoting democratic values, revitalizing multilateralism, and advancing innovative approach to global governance. So lastly, I'd like to stress this sentence. Together, I think South Korea, EU, and Nordic countries can safeguard the liberal norms and while shaping the future of global democracy through collective actions and more proactive and renewed strategic vision. Thank you. It's all my presentation.
So thank you very much. As always, very enlightening. I'm going to change my glasses now so I can actually see you on the screen. I'm old enough to have switched glasses even when I'm reading on screens. First of all, I would like to, if anybody has a question, please go into the Q&A and ask the question there, and we will select a few of the questions. So the Q&A, and I will read them. I fully agree with you. I mean, a lot of these things that you mentioned is right up where I think we should do, and I'm particularly happy. And I think that's maybe also is a result of your time here in Sweden, that you have the Nordic-Baltic focus, because the Baltic and the Nordics, we do share a lot of commonalities, especially when it comes to security challenges.
Right.
One thing that struck me, multilateral relationships, and I think this is the future. But what are the limitations? And I'm not thinking necessarily about the limitations between the Nordic Baltics and South Korea, but rather how far will the United States, or maybe particularly President Trump, let us diversify? Because of course he made it very clear that if anybody uses this opportunity to create or distance themselves from the United States and everything, they would be punished. So you see any limitations where we can go, or is it something that is acceptable?
I think that's a very good question. I believe especially diversification, it's quite important topic at this moment. I believe from Korean's perspective, of course, Korea needs to strengthen the Korea-US alliance as the foundation for the East Asia security perspective. But at the same time, I think especially Korea's EU's perspective, the relationship has been growing despite of the U.S. Selective engagement or the return of the second Trump administration. I think it's more about the aligning with like-minded partners. I think that's also the current Republican Party's members and the officials from the Trump administration. They would probably agree with that agenda because I think in the Trump administration there's also a conventional interventionists also from the more traditional Republican officials. And I do believe it's expanding multilateralism between Korea and EU and Nordics and Baltics, and also show a growing consensus for them to secure to maintain the regional security. And also the Trump administration tends to empower and let the countries to do more voluntary security contribution to their own regional aspect. So I think that's also that would probably booster the Korea, Nordic, and Baltic multilateralism because I think providing security aspects and the governance aspect, I think U.S. really doesn't want to spend much time on that. So I think we're taking the leadership in that perspective from that regional aspect. So I think the Trump administration would probably like it. this idea.
Well, hopefully, I mean, I guess
Yeah.
currency cooperation is out of the deal because that would weaken the US dollars. But I was also thinking about green development, which something that is absolutely essential from a European point of view. And as you rightly point out, I mean, we have a lot of innovation. We do rely on China to a great extent. I mean, more than 90% of our green tech is Chinese. They are leading the development. But production, you know, Europe tend to be not as quick as South Korea is. And we see that also in the weapons production, which is, I think, is an essential. So, but here it's also is that now Trump has made it, you know, windmills. You know, he's personally attacking windmills of all things. So I'm, you know, the challenge there is something. But then, I mean, one thing for me, it's that really ties. We're not that far away from each other when it comes to security, because with North Korean troops in Ukraine or in Russian-controlled territories, I mean, they're an essential part of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And of course, when we look at, I mean, Reuters made a study now together with another think tank, which I can't remember, but they estimated at least 15,000 containers of weapons to a price tag up to 50 billion. I have not been able to verify that, but it's at least more than 10 billion US dollars. That is much higher than the Chinese 2.2 billion in civilian trade. So now we have North Korea as a concerning threat to European security in many ways. And I think here it's something we can definitely collaborate on, or if it's under the OSA or if it's another area. But where do you see the limitations of security cooperation? I mean, as you pointed out, there's a Moscow-Seoul relations that you also need to take care of. And you can't be too engaged, I assume, because that would threaten the relationship with North Korea. I mean, this is a balance here that you need to do. How do you see that?
I fully agree with your statements, Nicholas. I think the current situation, especially the Europe and Asia, is really the security matters deeply interconnected, and of course, that this new administration wants not to provoke Russia when it comes to security matters, and also try to have some good relations, inter-Korean relations, to restore the dialogue. So I think that's the main agenda. But I think when it comes to security cooperation with Europe, providing OSA, I think that's not really provoke the North Korea at this point. But I think that's matter with Russia. But especially the recent, I think the geopolitical challenges is shifting because, as you know, the recent the Chinese Victory Day military parade. So Xi Jinping framed the narrative as most peace versus war. So I think it's more these Chinese, Russia, North Korea is aligning together. So at this point, I think it's for South Korea is not they cannot actually take care of restoring the Korea Seoul Moscow relations at this point. So I think the Lee administration is quite cautious of restoring the Korea Russia relations at this point, and North Korea is not really willing to engage with South Korea at this point at the same time. So I think growing this authoritarian alignment, I think it's important to support, I think, for the Lee administration's perspective as well, to Nordic and Baltic and Indo-Pacific overall, and grow strategic stance of Korea's foreign policy domain, and also its ongoing Korean Nordics defense industry dialogue. I think also that would contribute to this extent. So I think overall it's very challenging geopolitical circumstances when it comes to because the has to take care of the Russia and North Korea at the same time. But I believe at this point it's not really necessary to restore relations with Russia and North Korea. I think it's more important to align with the US, Japan, and like-minded countries like European Union and Nordic countries and Baltic states to have our strategic points. And also, I think it would be unrealistic to expect them to compensate, especially the China and Russia, North Korea, to compensate for our weakened strategic positions. So I think it's very important to interconnect security in the security domain with Nordic and Baltic countries at the same time.
Fantastic. We have a few questions here from the audience.
Sure.
I'm going to take one from Fredrika Bagna. United States progressive disengagement from institution in support of democracy, such as the recent defunding of NED or Trump withdrawal from UNHRC, UNESCO, and WHO, is eroding the post-World War II liberal order. With the US stepping back from its traditional role, do you see Korea-Nordic cooperation as more about preserving the old liberal order or building a new, more flexible, multipolar version of it?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's important to we could take over the traditional, the old liberal order, and because I think because it's very recent theme. I think it's been few centuries that the when it comes to sovereignty and human rights and overall the global governance and this democratic system has been very few decades. But I think based on these norms and foundations, I think the Nordics and European countries and Korea, what they were able to grow when it comes to, and I think the people overall, we are benefited from this kind of the current rules-based international order. So I think at this moment we should preserve the old traditional value of the rules-based order and sovereignty and human rights, universal human rights. So I think that's the current position at this point. And when it comes to multipolar world, I think it's quite impossible at this moment because maybe it's about more US, China, Russia multipolar aspect. I think we should be more at even during this time. I think it's more significant to step up with the current system and rules-based system and reinforcing for the long term and mid-term for the next generation of leaders. I think that's more important to defend our values and our identities at the same time. So I think the Korean Nordics cooperation should be more focused on the restoring and taking back the leadership vacuum and current liberal and rules-based order at this point.
Well, actually, then it's another question here from that follows sort of right up on this is Skaida Riskia. Korea-Nordic cooperation often praised as a model for defending liberal values. But given the current selective engagement of major powers, to what extent can this partnership translate ideals into tangible influence rather than symbolic alignment? And I mean, I think this is a bit of a risk sometimes that we want to do a lot, but what can we do?
So, I mean, it's more about I think it's also symbolic alignment and both, but also I think it could make tangible influence to other nations. This could be the example of leading democracies. How can they actually contribute to the world, the universal human rights, and overall those who are working in fragile contexts, such as North Korea and the other countries? Because I think it's very important to notice that the current circumstances, I think it's very much important to step up when it comes to this idea, because I think the current circumstances, especially geopolitical challenges between the Russia, China, and North Korea, this trilateral circumstances, I think it's very important to uphold those values to maintain the current world system. I think if we do not step up, I think there's no one actually can lead this international order. I think it's so it should be more influencing next generation leaders to keep track on these universal values and the rules-based order to prevent any kind of authoritarian alignment and new kind of world order. I think that's really important to preserve and protect at this point.
Well, I mean, in one way or two, we might need those lessons ourselves in the European Union, because of course the European Union is in no way perfect when it comes to populism and well, non-democratic adventures. I mean, some of our political leaders and parties tend to go both left and right to the extreme. So, but I think that's very interesting. We have Sion Park here in who is asking, I'm interested in the Nordic countries. I'm currently studying at graduate school in Germany and will be starting an internship at the Korea EU Research Center in Belgium next week. Is there a Korean Nordic youth cooperating platform I could join as a student? Alternatively, what might I be able to do as a student and young person to foster such relations? I mean, maybe this is actually, he's trying to do exactly what you're trying to do.
Oh, yeah, that's true, though. I mean, it's a really great question. I think, especially as a young people, I think it's really important to maintain the good network with especially Korean Nordic, because we share the same values. We share the same. We need to develop this kind of the normative norms, especially when it comes to liberal international order. So I think at this point, I think there's not much of the Korean Nordic youth cooperation platform at this point. It's not really institutionalized. I think some embassies are actually working on different types of youth engagements at this point, but I think there's no like annual or like the long-standing youth cooperation platform at this point. So our forum is try to do to foster this kind of the cooperation with ISDP and Nordic countries to foster young professionals exchange because we could share the consensus when it comes to Korean Peninsula and also European security and overall the liberal international order and rules-based international order. So I think, especially as a student, I think it's really important to connect with a lot of people and keep connecting with other professionals with Korea and Nordic's perspective. I think that's very important. So, and maybe you could join the other, maybe if we and ISDP have different events, when it comes to exchanging young professionals, I think it would be great to participate and attend. And then we will try to foster a lot of more meaningful exchanges between between young professionals from two regions. I think that would be great to join if you like to. Yeah.
Well, I can only reinforce what you said. I mean, we are incredibly interested in building that sort of cooperation over time. It might not be, we do have some engagement and some plans to do some more. But as you said, it's not much out there right now, but we will be working much more on this as we go along. And then actually one of my questions as well, Melita Pakulia has just asking, what role do you see for Korea Nordic Baltic cooperation addressing hybrid threats and disinformation? I mean, we wrote a publication on Sino-Russian cooperation when it comes to this. And well, basically anything that happens in Taiwan comes to Europe 6 months later, because they pick up, they learn either directly close cooperation or ad hoc. And of course, I would assume that North Korea is picking up a lot from the war in Ukraine. The Russian invasion of Ukraine is not only a war, it's important to note that it's actually a Russian invasion. What can we learn? How can we collaborate? Because they are learning and they are collaborating. So what can we do?
So I think, Nicholas, you're much more expert than me when it comes to the hybrid threat and disinformation. But from my perspective, I think there's a mutual interdependence when it comes to this matter, because I think especially growing alignment with North Korea and Russia when it comes to overall sensitive technologies, I think that's also the big problem. And so we have diverging security threat perceptions at this point. And also Nordic and Baltic, I think they have the experience of countering this kind of disinformation strategy and hybrid threat posed by Russia in recent years. And also South Korea has been responding to North Korea's sensitive hacking or in different types of disinformation strategies. So I think especially combining South Korea's cyber technologies and cybersecurity technologies, and also Nordic and Baltic's cybersecurity and disinformation's experience. I think combining these traits, I think it would be perfect to cooperate and deeply discuss this and address these issues more jointly. I think that would be more perfect concrete step toward, I think, to dismantle, to count this mental this kind of the hybrid threats and disinformation agenda and strategies from maybe mainly from Russia and North Korea and China.
One a bit sensitive question, I guess. It's from Felicia Kempe. Do you think the martial law crisis has affected the Korea-EU relations in any way? Well, affecting the EU willingness to deepen strategic cooperation with South Korea, then in particular. I mean, do you think it had an impact, or did it have a negative or positive? Because, I would love.
I think that's also a good question. So we had very difficult times for last 6 months and 9 months. I think it's very domestic turbulent we actually have faced. And I think at this point, EU is not. I think the martial law crisis really not has affected the Korea-EU relations when it comes to strengthening the cooperation between two regions. Of course, because I think the martial law crisis was really a big crisis for our democracy, but I feel actually we overcame, and the new administration is legally elected without any kind of conflicts. So I think South Korea showed pretty much of democratic resilience when it comes to defending democratic values. So I think European Union is deeply understand this kind of the resilience and setback afterwards. So I think it really didn't hinder the Korea-EU strategic cooperation due to the martial law crisis. I think there was some sort of crisis in December, but I think we overcame pretty much quickly, and we showed the resilience. So I think that really didn't matter to the strengthening the Korea-EU's cooperation at this time. Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that what is important for EU here is to understand that despite the crisis, the democratic rules kicked in, and it was actually a very successful case. But I think the challenge is rather how, now we come back to disinformation and misinformation, and of course actors who want to damage relations between South Korea and Europe, or South Korea and democratic states, of course, portray a very different picture. They portray a democratic crisis in South Korea, when in fact it's not a crisis at all. This is evidence that the South Korean democracy is stronger than it's ever been. So I think it's important that we highlight this clearly, that South Korea actually came out on the right side of this crisis. And I'm not sure all European states would have done the same, to be very frank. I think that this was actually something we can learn from, how South Korea handled such a democratic crisis in a difficult situation. We have, I love to take students since we're talking about young leaders. Vendinso Songrana, doctoral student working, I apologize for all the names I've been butchering. I'm a doctoral student working on a strategic partnership agreement between European Union and Japan. My question is, what is the scope of the free trade agreement linked to the strategic agreement in multilateralism or in bilateral cooperation between European Union and its partners? What do you think is the true contribution of this conventional framework and its limitations, given that we're dealing with international law? I cannot answer that, so I hope you can answer that question.
I can answer that as well. So I think it's more about the free trade agreement is linked to the strategic agreement in multilateralism. So I think, from my perspective, I think I can answer this one like this very brief answer. So Korea and EU has been a great trading partners, and I think one of the first FTAs that EU agree with Korea back in on 2000 early 2010s, and I think that's very important. Kind of like binding foundation to foster the closer strategic cooperation between two countries. So I think this multilateral trading system really contributes to strengthening and tying economically and strategically, because I think it's at this point the security is a matter of economy and trade at this point. So since the trade deal with EU and free trade agreements with European Union and Korea, I think it's been a really great partner, and I think that really foster a lot of more deep cooperation between two countries, not only in economic side but also in political and security side and culture side. So I think it's kind of true contribution, I think, when it comes to trade system and free trade agreement overall. So I believe um, defending multilateral trading system is very important at this point, and also, so that's, I think, the reason why the European ambassador to Korea actually mentioned about the new trade kind of the agreement with Korea, framework with Korea, I think called MPIA. I think that's also been a great, if Korea could join that framework, I think that would be great to foster the cooperation as well. If I don't think that's really answer your question, but just wanna, yeah, be simple as possible.
Well, I mean, it's a good question, and it shows that more research needs to be done. Pedro Henrique Martins, I guess it's Martinsson maybe, but I can only see part of the name there. But you mentioned that the point of these cooperation agreements was to safeguard the rule-based international liberal order, especially against the growing authoritarian group of countries that seems to be consolidating in opposition to these systems. Do you think these could be extended to newer and more fragile democracies such as Brazil, India, South Africa, who seems to be in between these groups, as to bring them closer to democratic camp? I mean, I think that question is especially valid since we had the meetings in China where we see in especially, of course, Modi being cozying up to both Putin and Xi, and yeah, how do you see this?
I think it's a very valid question, as you mentioned. I think especially that's the reason why I mentioned about more ideal policy recommendation is to create more international comprehensive democracy fund. So I think the first one is more unilateral approach to the Korean Nordic Baltic multilateral democracy forum, and then we could probably expand this with some leading countries, advanced democracies, to lead this kind of the leadership vacuum at this point when it comes to promoting democracy and democratic governance system. So if we could extend the attendance of Brazilian representatives or Indian representatives or South African representative to the Global Democracy Fund, then we could nurture the young leaders from these countries. I think in a mid to long term, I think it would show some kind of effect when it comes to bring them closer to more democratic camp, because I think it's the most important part of this fund and forum is to fostering young professionals around the world and to have more fellowships and training programs and get some great network between these young professionals across the borders. I think that's very important as the most important aspect of this establishing this kind of forum and fund. So I think it would take a longer time, but if we could create this kind of the comprehensive international democracy fund or forum, then we could probably bring all the young professionals from the Brazil, India, and South Africa and fragile democracies together. Then we could make change probably in 20 to 30 years, I guess. So that's, I think, it would incentivize these more young leaders and next generation people to bring them closer into the democratic camp. But I think in short term, I think it's quite impossible to bring them all together at this fragile context of geopolitics at this moment.
Yeah. Well, I
I
mean,
hope,
and as you point out, this takes time, and
yeah,
what we're looking at is, I think, the biggest challenge I see is really the political commitment.
right.
Democracies, we tend to look at all investments in election cycles,
Mhm.
and an election cycle is never longer than 5 years, and it's mostly four, which makes it's difficult to make that sort of long-term commitment. And then it is, I think it is a challenge in that sense. But
Mhm.
I agree with you. What we need is to do this. The United States started out to do this already before, but of course during the President Trump, all the connections to democracy has been dismantled. So I guess the Nordics and South Korea might have to bring up the torch and talk about liberal democracies.
Right.
But yeah, for me, this has been very enlightening discussion, and it makes me hopeful because I think as a Nordic, it's good to hear that we have, call it like-minded people on the other side of the pole, not maybe always to the west, but also to the east now. So this is very positive, and I think it's a very constructive discussion.
Right. Thank you. I mean,
But yeah,
oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
sorry, sir, the floor.
No, no worries. Just go ahead. Yeah.
No. I just wanted to thank you a lot for your insightful comments and your time here at ISDP. And I've also mentioned to the people listen that we will continue the collaboration with the Young Leaders Forum, and hopefully we will be able to do much more along the lines that you have presented today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicholas, and thank you so much for having me. ISDP it was very valuable and a very great opportunity since May. I think it was very glad to be actually in person in Stockholm. I learned a lot from Nordic's perspective when it comes to seeing the Korean Peninsula and overall the foreign policy. And I think especially it's not really it. I think as you mentioned, it takes a lot of time probably. But I like to propose this one because I think it's most in this situation, in this context of fragile global geopolitical challenge context, I think it's really important to leading democracies like Korea, Nordics, and they could step up and that we could preserve this liberal international values, and together we could create and shape the future of global democracy through collective action and renewed and new strategic vision. So I believe I'm very hopeful for the future. So I hope the both governments really listen to this webinar to reflect the policy. And very thankful to ISDP for having me again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we're very grateful for being able to have you with us. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you.